The question of what will happen if things go wrong and if things go right. In other words, we're talking about data, not dates. Does the government have a target in terms of hospitalisations and ICU admissions that might precipitate another lockdown? Does the government have a target for the numbers of people vaccinated that might precipitate an abandonment of all the rules and regulations about indoor dining, for instance? Because that's one of the things the restaurateurs want clarified.
There's no magic figure or single metric, because there can't be. There are a number of different factors at play, and it's not just about the number, it's also about the trajectory, the speed at which things may be getting worse. 45 in ICU and stable at that figure is different to 45 at ICU and increasing by 5 a day, as people understand. So it's about trajectory and a number of different metrics. One thing I would say is that the Delta wave is different because of the vaccination programme. Huge numbers of people are protected. So if you go back to the Alpha wave, 1,000 cases would have resulted in 20 deaths. Now 1,000 cases will result in 1 death or 2. So, it's a tenth as serious in terms of mortality. How it translates into hospitalisations is a little bit more complicated, but the evidence, for example, from Scotland, and this would be borne out in Ireland as well, is the hospitalisation rate is about 1.5%. So, 1,000 cases or 2,000 cases a day now means something very different to what it would have meant prior to the vaccination programme. But obviously, if cases escalated to very high levels, that would turn into high levels of hospitalisation and high levels of ICU admissions, and that would be a problem. But it is important to bear in mind that we've between 800 and 900 more hospital beds than we had before the pandemic started. As of today, there are 96 people in hospital with COVID, and that includes people, by the way, who aren't being treated for COVID. They might be in with a burst appendix or in for an EOP, and they happen to be COVID positive as well. And we're trying to get a bit better data from the HSE on that, so we can distinguish between those who are treated for COVID as opposed to those who happen to be COVID positive, but that's not why they're in hospital, and they would be sent home but for their other complaint. So we'll have to monitor the situation. Looking at what happened in Scotland, Netherlands, Portugal, other places, I think we can, England, all ahead of us in terms of the Delta wave, I think we can anticipate, Northern Ireland as well, I think we can anticipate that cases could go as high as 3,000-4,000 a day, and then we would hope that they will level off as they appear to be in those countries, particularly Scotland. But this is a dynamic situation, and we have to keep it under constant review, and we will. And the Cabinet Committee on COVID will meet throughout August. There won't be a traditional August break as there wasn't last year.
A lot of people texting us about amusement arcades, bowling centres, bingo halls and so on. When can they officially reopen? And what about, just having the same drill as they have for restaurants? If you're vaccinated, you can have the COVID QR code reader and in you go to the bingo. What would be wrong with that?
Well, the legislation that we adopted before the Dáil broke up and the President signed on Wednesday gives the power to the Minister for Health to open those other indoor settings, like amusement arcades, like bingo halls, like bowling alleys, applying the pass system. So the same system as we're going to apply to indoor dining. But certainly the sense from NPHET and the sense around the Cabinet table is that we would be reluctant to do any further easing of restrictions for another couple of weeks, at least until we see where the Delta wave takes us. And I know that's disappointing and probably feels very unfair for people who run those kind of businesses, because they would say we're no different and no more high risk than a restaurant, and I understand that. But it's just with the numbers of cases escalation the way they are, the sense from NPHET and the sense around the Cabinet table is let's hold on to what we've gained and not go backwards, and let's take a little pause before we ease any restrictions further.
Now, you made some headlines yesterday talking about weddings and suggesting that if you were thinking of getting married in September, you wouldn't be planning for 100, but rather plan for 50. Lots of questions on this, but particularly people saying, look, if all my wedding guests are vaccinated, does it matter how many I have?
Well, how do you know that all your wedding guests are vaccinated?
No, but they don't get into the reception. They don't get into the hotel unless they've got the QR code that will be validated by the hotelier.
That's something we haven't explored at the moment. The limit on the number who can attend a wedding is 50, and there isn't a requirement to check that people are vaccinated or not. In pure public health terms, you could allow people to attend weddings if they were fully vaccinated, but the issue would then immediately arise as to what you do with people who are not vaccinated. Would they then be uninvited, and what would happen with children? Would they be uninvited too? And I just don't think anybody wants to go down that route at the moment. I might be wrong, but I don't get the sense that anybody particularly wants to do that, especially because invitations go out long in advance and to have to uninvite.
Well, that's the point. A lot of people saying they plan for 100 based on previous statements for August, and those invitations have gone out. What are they to do now? Are they to disinvite 50 people?
Well, Pat, I always hate to be the bearer of bad news, but what I said yesterday was the best advice that I can give people. The current rule is 50 is the maximum that you can have at a wedding. We did indicate that might increase to 100 in August if things were going in the right direction. With the rising case numbers, they're not, quite frankly. So what I'm saying to people is the best advice is to plan for 50. And bear in mind, everybody wants their wedding to be a memorable day, a day that they can remember in a joyful way and a pleasant way for the rest of their lives. Nobody wants their wedding to be a place where there's a COVID outbreak and maybe some people end up in hospital. That's not what anybody wants. And, 1/3 of the adult population not fully vaccinated, it's reasonable to conclude that at a wedding of 50, there'd be maybe 16 or 17 people who are not vaccinated mixing together indoors for hours. Like, that's not low risk. And to increase that to 33, that would be a higher risk again, And nobody wants their wedding to be remembered for the rest of their lives as a COVID outbreak. Certainly I wouldn't.
Now, jobs and employment is part of your responsibilities as a minister. The story that employers are docking wages for people who have to leave their employment and go for a vaccine appointment, that seems churlish and unfair.
And it is, a appointment for a COVID vaccine, I suppose, is a little bit like a medical appointment. Most of the time it should be possible to organise your working day or your shifts around that, particularly if you get plenty of notice. But actually what's happening at the moment, because the vaccine programme is going so well, is people are registering for their vaccine and they're getting an appointment, for a day's time or 2 days' time or 3 days' time, and your shifts might already be set out. So what we're saying to employers that in those circumstances, you really should let your employee get their vaccine and not dock their wages for it. It's different if they had 2 weeks notice or a week's notice, and you can adjust shift patterns for that. But where they get an appointment very quickly, and that is happening now, you really should facilitate them and not penalise them financially. It is in your interest that your staff are vaccinated for all sorts of obvious reasons, and have a heart, basically.